My professor said I'd never make it as a writer. Last week I was hired to review his rejected manuscript when Professor Mitchell told me I lacked the fundamental talent for creative writing. I almost dropped out of college. It was my junior year and I'd submitted what I thought was my best short story to his advanced fiction workshop. He returned it covered in red ink with a note at the bottom. Perhaps journalism would be a better fit for your direct style. The entire class saw it during our critique session. 22 students watching as he used my story as an example of what not to do. Portier pointing out every cliché, every awkward transition, every character he deemed flat. Writing requires a certain sensibility, he said, not quite looking at me. Some people simply don't have it, I cried in the bathroom afterward, then switched my major to communications. I still wrote at night, but I stopped sharing my work. Professor Mitchell was a literary darling parent. His debut novel had won a prestigious award, and he reminded us of this fact approximately twice per class. After graduation, I took a job at a local magazine. Nothing glamorous, part mostly covering community events and editing classified ads. But I kept writing my stories, submitting them to literary journals under a pen name. 3 years and 74 rejection letters later, a small press published my collection of short stories. It didn't make any bestseller lists, but it got solid reviews. Might it that I was offered a position as an assistant editor at a mid-sized publishing house last week. A manuscript landed on my desk, Perto, a novel by none other than Professor Mitchell. His cover letter mentioned his award-winning debut, his tenure at my alma mater, and his significant contribution to American letters. The acquisition editor had already rejected it, but wanted a second opinion before sending the formal letter. Something's off about it, she said, but he's got credentials, so give it a thorough read. I spent the weekend with his manuscript. The prose was technically perfect, flawless grammar, sophisticated vocabulary, complex sentence structures, but the characters felt like mannequins moving through elaborate settings, speaking dialogue no human would ever say. On Monday, I wrote my assessment. While the technical execution is impeccable, the narrative lacks emotional resonance. The characters' motivations remain opaque, and the dialogue feels constructed rather than organic. The author demonstrates mastery of language, but struggles to translate that into authentic human experience. I signed it with my full name, Pert, at my pen name, Pert, and added my title, Ego Fiction Editor. 2 days later, I received an email from Professor Mitchell. The subject line was simply, "You, I remember you," he wrote. "The girl who couldn't grasp nuance. I stand by my assessment of your undergraduate work, but I must acknowledge that you've secured a position of some influence. Perhaps you could reconsider your evaluation of my manuscript." Gaining courtesy between writers, I stared at his email for a long time before responding. "Dear Professor Mitchell, thank you for your note. I remember you teaching us that writing must be honest above all else. I've submitted my honest assessment of your work. In the spirit of professional courtesy, I've attached 3 short stories from an emerging author whose work demonstrates the emotional authenticity your manuscript lacks. These stories were all rejected from your workshop 5 years ago. They've since been published to critical acclaim. Sincerely, the girl who found her sensibility." I didn't mention they were my stories. He'll figure it out when he reads the byline yesterday. My boss called me into her office. Professor Mitchell had contacted the publisher demanding a different reader. She showed me his email, which called me vindictive and unprofessional. "Is there history here I should know about?" she asked. I told her the truth, all of it. She nodded slowly, then smiled. "Your assessment was correct. The manuscript isn't right for us." She paused. "But I read those stories you published. We should talk about a potential collection. Sometimes rejection is just someone else's opinion, and sometimes it's the beginning of finding your real voice."